Angular CLI, a command line interface for Angular. How many here work with Angular today? Half. So I hope you don't expect to learn Angular 2 today, because this is introduction, how you can get started with your Angular 2 project, but not the language itself. So command line interface, why do you want command line interface? How many here have had trouble or sworn when they're trying to set up Angular 2 projects? One. There are two. So the others, it just worked, or you didn't do any Angular 2 projects? You didn't do any Angular 2 projects. Okay.
I fell asleep after reading 8 hours of how to do it.
Or a 1,000th version of how to do it too. So yeah, I've been setting up Angular 2 projects for, welcome. This is Sinito guy. Yeah, welcome. Take a drink and sit down. So one of the reasons Angular CLI was created was to make it easy to set up, because the Angular team and community saw that it was really hard to set up Angular 2, Webpack 2, TypeScript 2 when the versions changed. And even if you do it, when you do it manually, like I have been doing for a year now, from one project to another, it's not exactly the same. So when I go back to my old project, I check out what is this? How did I set up this one? And so on. With Angular CLI, it's really easy. It's one command and you have up and running your complete project with your complete stack. It works right off the box. You have everything you need. It will run npm install with all the packages you need from npm registry. But the most important thing, which the team learned while looking at other successful communities, was to follow the best practices. When you use CLI, you will follow the best practices. And what does that mean? If you look at, there is Ember CLI. Angular CLI is based on Ember CLI. It's more or less a fork and then added Angular 2 support. And what was great in Ember community was that everyone used the CLI. And so whatever project you took from Ember community, it looked the same. You knew where to look and how to start it, how to run it and test it and so on. And whenever someone wanted to change something or improve the command line, the improvements went into the command line and all the community got those improvements. So instead of setting up your projects manually and doing this is the way I want, try to contribute to Angular CLI and make that the command line interface we really want to use. Because then you will have much easier when you go back to check out your projects or you want to get involved in other projects. And you people will know that you follow what's today the best practice. So that's one of the main reasons why we want to use Angular CLI. To set up Angular CLI, you install it, npm install globally, or you fork it from GitHub and do npm link like I do, because Angular CLI is developed more or less daily, but the releases are not pushed up daily. So you can get the latest by getting the master from GitHub. To create a new project, ng new and the name of your project. That creates a folder and all the code, scaffold code to start up. You go inside your folder and you start ng-serve. And then you're up and running with your projects, with your main component and module. That sounds quite nice compared to setting up all Webpack 2 and all the other loading stuff that you need for Angular 2. So let's try and create a project. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. We will try to do some. So to start a new project, you do this, and it creates your the structure, a folder, and the code inside, and then it runs npm install, and this takes quite a while because it installs all your dependencies, Angular stuff and things that you need, and especially on this MacBook and this Wi-Fi takes. I tested before; it took 2 minutes to run this here. But you see what it's created, some style sheets and so on. We can go inside. I already started. Oops. So here is another one I ran before, so we can see. So what it creates, a source folder with your code. You have your app with your app component and a module. You have a folder for your assets, static images and things like that. You have 2 environments, development and production, and some other stuff that you need with your main file and polyfills and typings for TypeScript. And everything we do here is generated in TypeScript. How many have used TypeScript? Not many. How many know about TypeScript? Not many. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. So you get typings in JavaScript, simply said. And when you build the big projects, you want typings because then the compiler can find a lot of errors that you would otherwise see first when you load the page in browser. And you can get it much more easy to test too. So this is what is generated from the beginning. And if we want to, let's see, yeah, the other one is done. We can go inside the other one. So now we want to serve it. And serve will start a Webpack developer server. You see here, localhost 4200, which is listening, and it compiles your code and runs it. And when it says valid, that means that we can go and test it. So let's see here, if we load, we have app works. So this is what ng-new generates for you. It creates one component, one module, imports that component in there, and a simple HTML file to display the title. And the title is defined in your component as a variable. So this is like the basic Angular 2 project that you have here. And it takes, on this slow machine, 2 minutes to set it up. And then you can start coding. And everything you have here is also in Git. So everything is committed. So when you start coding, you just start committing and push your repository where you want when you're ready. That sounds quite easy, right? Or easy enough. It will not create the whole project for you, but it will make it easy for you to start. Tests. How many here do test-driven development? How many would like to do test-driven development? How do you test your code if you don't do test-driven development? Production, yeah. That's you use the customers. Yeah, that's also a way. And in your project, you maybe saw some .spec.ts files. That's your tests. It generates those two and set up the environment for you. So you can start writing tests and run them. And so there is no excuse for not writing tests because everything else is set up. And usually, for my experience is that my biggest problem is when I set it up manually, the setup for running tests has been always a problem, and that made me not write the test. But when I have the setup, then it's just adding tests to the spec file, and you get at least some tests for your code. You have also end-to-end testing, which starts your browser, and you can it runs tests in your browser by clicking components and so on, so you can visually see the tests and so on. So this is mainly unit testing. We can try that later. So it has Karma, Protractor, Jasmine. So the main JavaScript. So when you have created your project, you want to start coding. And command line Angular CLI can help you there. And the main command I use is ng-generate, which generates my components, modules, services, and a lot of things. And what it creates is, like you saw, the app component, a folder with your basic structure, so you can start coding. And by doing ngg component, and then you write your file name here, and you use the dash file convention, it will create a camel case class and append component to the name also. If you do service, it will append the service to your name. And if you do a module, it will create a folder, and inside that folder it will create one module, share.module, and one component, share.component, and import that one in the module. So you get that set up too. And when you create components, it will traverse upwards, and when it finds a module, it will import your component into that module automatically. So you get it accessible everywhere in your code. And that's usually something you always do. You create your component, you create your HTML file, you create your test file, then you import it in your module. This is all done by one command. With ng-generate, you can generate a lot of other things too. Interfaces and classes are one of those things that I use mainly. And here you have some other example. I said it's a file name, but you can use a complete path, which means that it will put your interface city into the folder shared. But the folder has to exist. It will not create the folder for you. And the same here. So, and the difference between interfaces and classes compared to components is that these don't create a folder and put the code inside the folder. So it will just create city.ts or user.ts in that folder. But if you would do ngg component share./city, it will be a folder, and inside that folder it would be a city component. And in our case, it would then import it into the shared module. So let's try. Do you follow? Do the concepts, component, service, and things like that module? Anyone know? Okay, you haven't used Angular 2 so much. Modules is a really nice way to put your components and your code together, so you don't have to import everything everywhere like you did in the beginning of the Angular 2 releases. So like if you wanted to use a component inside another component, you had to import all your other components. Now you just import them into the module, and all the components that are imported into that module have access to all the other components too. So the code is much cleaner. So let's start here where we did before. Component. Let's start header. So this one, what it does, it's like I said, it creates a folder, creates 4 files, even a CSS, a style sheet, and template, and a test file, and your component code. So if we do module shared, you will see that it will add the module and also the component for you. And if we do, let's say, class shared city, it will just create 1 file into that folder. And if we do component shared search, it created a folder inside shared and the component there. Now let's look at the shared module. Oops. Source app shared module. So this is the module it generated, but you also see when we generated the search component, it imported it here and make it available by declaring it, put it into the declarations. So everything inside the shared module or everything that will use the shared module will have access to that component. So that's all set up for you. And if we look at the class, which is just empty class, and that one is not imported anywhere. You are so quiet. So we didn't try this, but let's try ng-test. So what it will do, it will look for all the .spec files and run them. And it will also stay in watch mode. So when you run ng-test, it will stay and watch. When you save your code, it will rerun all the tests. So when you code, when I code, I have one terminal with ng-test running, one with ng-serve, a browser on another screen, and my editor in the middle. So every time I save, I see the compiler running, I see the test running, and I see the browser updated. And I don't need to click anywhere. I just save, and it's done automatically. So you see directly if you break any tests, and you can decide if that's just some temporary or you have to fix the tests or fix the code. So if you do like this, so you can have these side by side, and oops, there is no ng-serve there. You saw also that it started, when you run the test, it starts, connects to the Karma browser. Karma. Just so, here we have our code. And here we have our app before. We didn't change anything in the code. So let's do check out the header component. Here's our header component. You see here that the selector starts with app, and if you checked before, this is the prefix that's used for every selector in your code. And you can decide when you create your project, or you can go and change it in the Angular CLI configuration file, which prefix you want to use. But it's a good best practice to use a prefix. So when someone else reuses your module, so you minimize the collision risk of selectors. And if we check the HTML, we see we have header works here. So let's go to our main component template, app component template here. And let's add this one. And now if we check here, you see the compiler is rebuilding and the tests have been rerun and we got 3 fails. So we'll need to check out why did they fail, because we changed the app main template. Probably we have a test that tests what should be generated in the main template. So, but if we go to our browser, it's also reloaded and we see header works is already added up there. What are you doing now? That one should be offline. Okay. So it's really easy to work with your Angular 2 code when you have all this set up, especially if you have like 2 screens or more, then everything is reloading and you can have a good overview and you don't have to leave your hands from the keyboard.
When you save the compiles and tests,
Yes.
it's smart enough to only take those changes.
Yes. It's so here if the compiler checks what's changed and is quite smart on rerunning that. So yes. And exactly how it does that, I don't know. I have not checked into it, but I know it splits up. And if you have like modules, it can split up modules. So like it doesn't know that, okay, if you change this file, you should recompile this module, and then whatever is importing it should be also recompiled and rebuilt. So it's quite, and you saw it didn't take too long. It took 4 seconds on this MacBook to rebuild this small code, but this MacBook is dead slow. Never buy this one for your development. But this is how. So now, if we go back to our header, it will. Yeah, you saw it's already done. So now it was even faster because it was all just a template that was recompiled. So it says here, should render title in a h1 tag failed. So it was expecting the first tag probably to be h1. Let's see. What does the test say? So here is a test for the app component. It's set up before each test. It sets up the testing module with the only app component. And then it runs the tests and it should create the app, checks if it exists an instance. Then it should have a title that's called, says app works. And that's the variable. And then it should find a h1 that has the text. And that should be there. So I don't know why it failed, really. So, let's see. So what we have done so far is not much coding. We just generate stuff that is more or less placeholder for where we should put our code. And as soon as you start coding, you start using other external modules, packages, and things like that. And Angular CLI is there to help you import them too. But if you want to install, let's say, ng Bootstrap, which is a module for Angular 2 with Bootstrap functionality, you do a normal npm install, and it gets your JavaScript code and puts it in the node modules. And in your code, you can just do import the ngB module, add it to imports, and then everything from the ngB module is available for your components. So you can do ratings, drop downs, type ahead, and things like that. And that's some simple. And most of the JavaScript things you install is like this. You do npm install, you save it. If you save it as a development dependency or the just normal dependency, it really doesn't matter anymore in Angular 2 because everything is packed to more or less one JavaScript that's sent to your production. So it doesn't matter where the dependency is because it will include it into that one main file. But some files you install the same way, but you have to do something special, like let's say Bootstrap CSS. That's the thing you usually did when you worked with Angular 1 or jQuery. You added a link in your HTML file at the top that's links to this CSS or the Bootstrap JavaScript things. And in the Angular CLI configuration files, there is 2 parameters or variables, styles and scripts, where you add these, and then the project setup will include them into your project, so they are available.
But all of this is packaged, so we don't need to run this from the server that comes with the CLI. The production doesn't have to be this environment.
No, production is just normal web server, because when you're done with this, your Angular app, the front end, that thing that runs in the browser, only needs to be served from any web server you want. Just HTML and 1 or 2, usually 2 JavaScript files. One for the like polyfills and vendors, and your code. That's it. There is nothing else. And of course, all your assets. But you can include your assets into the JavaScript. So it will be just one big request. And that's it. So when I do deployment, I usually put everything, as long as it's below 100K per file, I put it into there. And as long as the big blob doesn't become many megabytes, I will, because it's much faster to do that one request. But the initial load, I try to separate the code, so the initial load becomes much smaller, and then I use the router to do prefetching for the rest of the code in the background. So the rendering for the first initial screen for the user is fast, and then we have 1-2 seconds or whatever we need to get the other stuff before the user starts interacting with the code. But then I try to put everything in as few requests as possible, because usually the download time is less than, let's say, the latency for mobile connection if you have many requests.
Oh, so is in Angular 2 is the templates compiled to JavaScript file, or are they one by one?
You can compile it to JavaScript. And what we're doing here, they are sent.
In your app file.
Yeah. So you can decide that, and it's called ahead of time compilation. But default is not on. So it sends the HTML and the the template compiler with your JavaScript code. So it's compiled in the browser. But yeah, and then with ahead of time you can compile them on the server side, so you don't have to send the browser, and that speeds up the rendering in the browser. But the blob, if you have a lot of templates, becomes bigger. So where were we? We were supposed to install some Bootstrap. Let's do like this. Yeah. No. So npm install Bootstrap. So here, let's do like this. So now we're installing ng Bootstrap and saving it in our package. So while we do that, we can go to our code. We go to our module. And here we import it. ngb module from ng Bootstrap. And then we add it into imports, ngb module. And here we call a convention function called for root, because you can decide, like sometimes you want to import a module, but you don't want it to provide everything that it can provide. And when you call the for root, you really say explicitly, give me everything, and then it will return the module with all the providers, services and things like that. So that's a convention to be able to re-import. Usually when you import a module deeper in your code, is that you want just access the components. You don't need the providers. Those you only need to import once. And I want my 4 spaces. So that feature is not in Angular CLI. So you can decide how many spaces you want in the generated code. But you have lint, and you can add plugins to lint, so you can lint your code to the spaces you want, or the look that you want. Now I have saved. Let's see if it works. We have installed the latest ng Bootstrap, which is the Angular 2 version with Bootstrap 4 stuff. So here we have our problem, and can't resolve. What's the problem? Not found. Why? Did I misspell something? Can't resolve Bootstrap. No. Okay, we do like this. Because there is, oops. No, it's wrong. So what did I do wrong here? Bootstrap. Ah, like this. So many eyes, and nobody saw it. So now we imported our module. Everything is fine. We haven't used it anywhere. So let's use it somewhere. Let's go to the header component. And let's add a rating. This is our header component. We do current rate number equals 5. So, and then NGB rating is the component in the module for the rating component, and what we pass to it is a variable or a value for the current rate. And oops. And it's rebuilding now. And if we go to our browser, we have our rating. That looks really bad. And that's because we don't have the CSS. The CSS is missing. So we do install. We install the Bootstrap CSS, and then we need to add it to our Angular configuration. So while it's installing, we can go here. So this is the Angular CLI configuration. It's in your root directory of the project. You have the name. You see here, you have the prefix that I talked about. And other configuration. And here you have the styles, where we should add the Bootstrap. And you start with ... because when ngserve is running or building, the root directory is the source directory. So you have to go one step up, and then modules, Bootstrap, and I never learned that, so Bootstrap, dist CSS, dist CSS, Bootstrap CSS. So now we have added that to styles. You see here you have the scripts tag. So let's say you would want to add some external scripts, jQuery, but please don't ever mix jQuery with Angular code. You don't need to, because you have almost everything in Angular 2. And if you don't have it, it's not that hard to add it. But importing the whole jQuery just to get one little plugin from jQuery is big overhead and unnecessary. But here you add JavaScripts that need to be that are not importable into your code, but you want to have them accessible. You have also environments, which are different configuration for your different environments. So let's see, we added style. What we need to do now is to serve it. And when it's done, we need to reload, and it should look better. We didn't have to reload, and our rating looks much better now, because the default Bootstrap CSS is now available for in our application. And now you can use whatever you want from your code, whatever you want from the ng Bootstrap module. And here you have example of alert, buttons, carousel, collapse, everything that you used to have in Bootstrap. You have now accessible. ng Bootstrap is the code part that you do the logic, and the Bootstrap CSS is for your CSS and styling.
You still have the grid, normal Bootstrap grid, all that, the CSS classes?
Yeah, you have whatever you want or import. So in this case, I imported the default Bootstrap CSS, so it's complete with grid and so on. And you can decide if you want to import the flex one or the normal one, old one, a grid. So it's up to you, because Angular, your templates, it's up to you what you want to do. The CSS that's generated for your code, let's say here, if you go to source app CSS, that CSS, now empty, is loaded into your components here. And that CSS is specific only for this component. So you don't have to do any fancy class naming and so on. You can style your HTML tags right there, and they will not collide with any other component HTML style sheets. So you can really put in it, but you can configure it to be global too if you want to, but usually you don't want to. And you can configure it if you want it to go down and apply on the style components below. So if you have, like say we have our header component, if we want to style the header component from here, we can configure that this CSS should also apply on the components below and so on. So so you can
Use private and public styles here, so you can have skins or skins.
well, skins, that's something application specific, how you if you want to switch skin styles for your application. But these styles are component specific. So here you shouldn't define, if you want to have skins, you shouldn't have the colors and so on in here. Here you should have layout more or less, and then you have the skin that applies on it on the top level.
So these CSS, they won't collide with global.
Yeah.
It's done. Is it a prefix?
It uses it adds prefix, but it also uses shadow DOM or shadow CSS. I don't remember exactly. So in your generated code, let's see. Where do we have it here? If we do like this. So you see it adds specific unique tags or URL IDs to each tag, and then so it's applied. So if you write a class there, it will make that class unique for that component unless you configure it not to make it. So you can have the same class in many components and they will not collide. So it becomes much easier to handle CSS, and you don't have to do all this fancy naming or think about where in the hierarchy your CSS is imported or so on. So what else? We had a third-party module. We have global. Anything else you want to see? We have more, but let's see. We do like this. Help. The only thing I have to complain about Angular CLI is it's a little bit slow sometimes, and I don't know why. Now it's like warmed up, so it's quite fast here on this one. Well, let's see what kind of commands we have here. Add-on is not available. asset sizes. It outputs the sizes so you can get an overview if you have any image that is way too big or a file or something like that in your style. Build, I will show you later. You build for production your code. Destroy, you can remove something you generated. Here we have the generated things. Generate command. You can do verbose or dry run just to test it.
So just wait a minute, you had some destroy there, you said.
Yes.
I can remove a component from registration.
Yes, it should be, but I haven't used it because when I remove it, I want to remove it by myself. But I haven't tried it, but it should be. What I think it does is it removes the component, the files, but it also removes the imports from the modules, which is what you want to do. So I haven't tried that one. I never remove code. I just write. Generate. We have seen a few things. You can do pipes and filters, generate pipes and filters, and some other things that I don't use that many times. Init is when you run ng-new, then it creates a folder, and inside that folder it runs ng-init. And you can run ng-init inside already existing project, and what it's supposed to do is upgrade your Angular environment and everything, and update the generated code if it needs to be updated. But right now what it does, it asks you if you want to overwrite the existing files that you have changed. And when it overwrites, it removes your changes, and that's just so it's not done as I expect it to work. But at least it's supposed to update the package JSON with latest Angular version, Webpack, and so on. So you get all that stuff in already existing project, which is quite nice. ng install is not used. You use npm install to install your stuff.
Forgot the global replace.
Global replace?
Creates a new directory and runs Ember in it.
Yeah, because it's based on Ember, so there is still so some of these commands are not available for Angular yet, or maybe will not be either. But so it is like if you go to and check the GitHub repository history, it is a fork from Ember CLI. ng-new, when you create a new full project, you can skip npm, bower, git, and things like that to make it fast, or if you want just the code and put it somewhere else in the existing repository or something like that. When you serve, you can define which port and host to bind and so on. Default is to listen all interfaces, which is really nice when you do mobile development. You put your mobile, you serve to your computer with your mobile, your iPad, and your browser, and all three are reloaded every time you save. So you don't have to like test them in all devices. You just put them in front of you and code, which is really nice. Now lately they added support for SSL, so you can proxy and have listen on SSL too if you want. Because nowadays there is more or less no reason to run anything unencrypted anywhere, even in your development environment. There is no reason. And especially if you bind to your host so you can access with your mobile, then you're opening your computer, so why use it unencrypted? Tests we went through. You can filter to run just specific tests or a module, like most of the test run environments. Build. You build your environment for different targets or different environments. Why is it served twice? Maybe I ran it twice. And you can lint and run end-to-end tests. So there are quite a few more things you can do. You can set your own configuration with ng set and get. I haven't got to that customization level yet in my Angular CLI projects, at least. So we can continue. I thought the pizza would be here by now, but we can continue.
You're talking slower and slower.
Yeah, slower and slower. So I mentioned before, under the hood in Angular CLI, you get the latest Angular version, you get the latest Webpack version, latest TypeScript, and you have a lot of other things like less and Sass support. So when you create your project, you can define that you want to run your your style sheets in Sass or less instead of CSS, and you get that automatically. So the file where I imported the Bootstrap CSS, if you create a project that's called Sass, you import this Bootstrap Sass there instead, and it creates your CSS for you. And you have lint and a few other things that are quite nice. So here you have the examples of how you create your project with another prefix that we mentioned before. App is default. You can set whatever you want. Most keep it short, but it's better to be to have a prefix that's unique, at least for your project in some way. It's good best practice. Sass, less, you just add a style property when you create your projects. And to speed it up, or if you don't want to use a new Git repository, you can skip those generations when you create your projects. Some more features. Some are disabled, like the first two are not available right now. But the idea with -- mobile is to use service workers in your code. Service workers is something that's the latest in Chrome, which allows the browser to be very intelligent what to load and when to reload and so on, which is when you have it, you can get really awesome offline experience with your Angular app. Especially in mobiles. And if you Google for Angular 2 service workers demos, you can see that there are like comparing native apps with a perfect Angular 2 app, and that one is much faster than a native app to build the offline experience. If you use Bash, you can get Angular CLI completion stuff commands. And one neat feature is, like you said, you can deploy it to any static websites, and there's built-in, so you can deploy it as GitHub pages. So it will create a public repository in your account and create GitHub pages, so you can test and send your app publicly to everyone else. And as long as you work with open source, that's really, really nice to be able to test that. When you're building, mostly you build for production, but maybe you build for staging. But staging is really just production with maybe different environment. So to build for production, you have three ways to do it, longer and longer. And you can also specify, like, I want to build production with this environment set up. And then you can have specific setup for the staging environment. And this will create all the code and put it in the dist folder. And here is the one that I mentioned before, ahead of time compilation, which will compile all your templates into JavaScript. And so when it's sent to the browser, it's already compiled and makes the rendering much faster. And depending on how many templates you have compared to how much JavaScript code, your application can become bigger or smaller, but it will be faster. One other neat feature is, since we are talking about Angular frontend, we're talking about the thing that we're running in the browser, but usually you want to talk to a backend, which you run somewhere else, some other project. But mostly when you deploy it, it is usually on the same host, same domain, and so on. And you can use a proxy configuration. So when and add a path, and when you access that path, localhost 4200/API, it will go to localhost 3000/API. So you can get access to your backend, but you don't have to have specific IP or port number to where you're running it right now. It can be external or local. What you have to remember is what you write here is appended here plus whatever you put extra on that URL. Secure is if it's encrypted or not. I hope you enjoyed the pizza. Great. And so the last slides I showed you before the pizza, I want to show you them in practice and tell you what's happening there. So we can start by building. I got a question what it really is doing when we are building. Let's see. Oops. Mirror. So when we do build production, so this is what we have now. When we do build production, what it does, it builds your code and packages into a few JavaScript files. And standard here is 2 files and 1 HTML file. And puts that in dist folder. And that folder is something that you can deploy anywhere you want for any static, any web server that can serve static content. So if we do ls now, we see I have a folder here, and in ls dist we have few files. Beside the HTML and JavaScript file, we saw we have icon and styles are also compiled to JavaScript. And we have 2 versions of each, one compressed and one uncompressed. And you see there is a hash, and it's linked into your HTML with that hash. So as soon as you deploy a new version, it will have a new hash. So when a user comes and loads the HTML, the browser will know it's time to load the other file. So you can cache this forever in the browser. You don't want them to reload this. You see also we have map files. That's so you can debug your code. Which is, so you see it's 7.6 megabyte now, but let's remove those and remove remove the gzip too. So now we have 1 megabyte for everything in our including the Angular template compiler that's shipped to the browser, so it compiles the templates, because we didn't build with the head of so if we do like this, then it will compile the templates into JavaScript too. let's see. So
You said that there was 1 meg. How much of that is, from what I could see, you had like 1 page with two words in it?
yeah, so it will not grow.
That is the basics.
So this is the basic, like it will not grow with megabytes for each component you add. It will just, this is like today more or less the minimum. They have made like hello world into 25 kilobytes or 30 kilobytes of with everything when you compile with ahead of time and like really optimize, then so it's really slow, really small. So here you see the map files are big, the compressed which I removed, like we have the main compressed is 127K now with all the templates and everything inside. This one. So this is really what will be, that's the main one that's shipped to the user. That's your code, and that one doesn't grow much bigger, like, oh, it depends. If you have 1,000 components, it will be bigger, but I have another project where I have, I don't know, 50, 60 components, and it's only 100K more. And then I don't compile the templates.
My shy friend here has a question.
Yeah.
Does this 605K, does it include the Angular 2 framework?
It includes everything you need. No, this is like if you check the index HTML, you see at the bottom it includes three files. The inline JS, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's very little small one. Then you have your styles, and then you have your main bundle, which contains everything. So you don't, yeah, it is big for this small project, but
I thought that the framework was supposed to come.
no. It's all included. And now with Webpack, which Angular CLI uses, you can do tree shaking. I don't know if it's already built into Angular CLI, but what it means is that let's say when we imported the ng Bootstrap module, then we imported the whole module with all the Bootstrap components it has. But when you do tree shaking, what it means is like you shake it, and it only the components that you use will be included in your code, and everything else will be removed. So if the components and modules are built so it supports tree shaking, then it becomes really, really, really small. So even like from the Angular framework, you don't need everything. It will be just removed when you build your project. And that will make it. No, I haven't done it. I don't think it's supported in Angular CLI yet. So that's gonna be really, really awesome. And then with service workers, where you divide, let's say you divide this main bundle into files. I usually try to divide it in 2 files. One, that's the first one that's loaded to the user. That one should be as small as possible, and then the rest of the code. But in this small project, the main code here is not our code. It's all the other stuff.
It also means that if you have very well-defined sections of your application, you could have them in separate files to be only served when someone actually visits that section of.
Yes. And you can do that with the router. You can fetch when your user goes there, or prefetch before, like while the user doesn't do anything, you prefetch those in the background, and then it becomes even faster for the user. So all this is to make the experience much better for the user. So let's run. Have you heard about the distributed database crate.io? No. No? Anyone? It's really, really fast. So if you have a lot of data and you want it distributed and really, really fast, then I can recommend to use that one. Okay, now I started that one in a Docker container, so it's running on port 5000. And what I want to show you is the proxy. So here I have my proxy configuration, which has 2 paths defined. So if I do ng-serve -- proxy and pass my proxy file, it will proxy for these 2 paths to localhost 5000. And I can use, in this case, I have the create database listening on that port. So if I wanted to use it in my my application, I could do localhost 4000 / API calls to that, and did I do it right? So the database is listening on 5000. Okay, if I do like this. This is the main the port that the database is listening on, and here is our proxying to that database, so you can access it in your code or surf it, which is quite neat when you have the backend locally on some other port or somewhere else, external, that you don't want to install the backend locally. So what did we have more there in those? So yeah, that one we showed, that one we showed. Yeah, okay, let's do this one. So we go back to ng-start, and let's deploy this one to GitHub, so everyone can see what we have done here today. Now it complains I have uncommitted stuff. Okay. So now we're deploying, and it will ask you for a token, so it can get access to your GitHub account. So let's go and create a token. Oh. Why did you do this? Which one? Which port was it? Tokens. Which path? So delete. Oops. Generate. Oh, come on. So we give it access to public, so it can create a public repository. We get a token. We go to our terminal. We paste it. My username. So now it has built our project. It goes and creates a public repository, uploads the dist, and creates a branch called gh pages, which you create when you deploy GitHub pages. And then you can so you can host static websites for free on GitHub with your own domain or with GitHub domain. So here we see, here's the path. If we go there, loading, application works. And so this one is now accessible for everyone on the internet. And so that's easy to deploy on GitHub, and you can add your own deployment if you want to deploy it somewhere else where you want. So if I go here and want to test the build that we have done, I have a shortcut here, so I can start a local static website, and it will load the build that we have created, I hope. No, it's not now because GitHub deployment did something, build it differently. So the paths were not correct for the application. So you can test your code by just serving this file with the built-in web server. Well, with the web server that comes with Mac if you do development, or in my case, I just have an alias for Python web server, just one liner that serves the directory I'm in. So, and then you can test that it works and see that, and then just ship the code, rsync it, or whatever you want to do for your deployment. And I had a question about running tests with Jenkins. The tests you can run with any tool. You can define which reporters you want to use, so they report the test results in a different way, so Jenkins can analyze it and then use that to show you the results, or later do the deployment or whatever you want. So it doesn't matter. It's not specific for Angular thing. So we had this, we had this, we had this. Do you have any questions? No? Is it? Well, it's brand new. It's not even released yet. So, but it's the community is getting traction to it, and if you help out building it, or like contributing by testing it and saying this doesn't work, or why do we do it this, it will become the tool that everyone wants. I didn't use it because it didn't create in the beginning. I didn't use it because it didn't create the setup the way I wanted, and everything was hidden. So I didn't understand what's happening here in my code, or like how is this running at all, and so on. Now I know how it's working. Now I don't need to see it anymore. Now it's fine that it's hidden. as long as I understand how I can customize it or do the things I want to do. So it's really growing and getting better, and I like it so far. And you usually don't start new project that often. Like most of us who work as a developer, you tend to work on a one project for a few months, if not years. So you don't do the ng new, but ng generate, you would do quite a lot. And even if I have shortcuts in my Emacs with snippets and templates and so on, here I get all the 4 files created and included in the right place and so on, just by one command, which is a big benefit. You can't use it on an old project. Well, I haven't tried, but maybe if you put the Angular CLI JSON configuration and you have the correct version of Angular 2 and Webpack 2 and TypeScript and their dependencies, then maybe ng generate could work in old project too. Could be a good thing to try. If you have a mobile, you could go to this site and answer the two questions I have put up there. I would appreciate it a lot. Otherwise, this was there is Angular CLI for 1, but I never used it, and I don't know anyone who has used it. So I don't know.
That code disappeared very quickly,
Okay, here it's coming again. So no, it's not. Yeah, I use modules today a lot. 19, no, 01. I use modules today because one thing that was cumbersome in Angular 2 projects in the beginning was that you had to import every component that you want to use in many places just to get the selector, let's say, in your template. You import it, you had to add it into this component because you want to use the selector, and then if you want to use it somewhere else. Now, if you import the components into your module, they are all available to all your other components. So it becomes much easier to handle your code and your services or providers, things you only need to import one place. So the code becomes much, much cleaner when it comes to creating components.
How do you usually group that?
It's app specific, but I try to think if it's going to be shared outside the application, then I put it in a module. Or if it's like context specific. So usually I have one shared module where stuff that's shared between different modules. And then those other modules are context specific. So let's say I have a site where you log in, then I have account specific account module, and then I have some service module and so on. And I change it as I figure out this didn't work and so on. So
Can you tie a lifetime of the code, or can you have delayed loading for a specific module or something like that? I do this in another framework for Windows program, which is pretty nice. The module is tied to that you can instantiate the specific module when it's needed. So you talked about that.
yeah, so with router, you can define that you want to load this code first when the user goes there. Yes. So you can. There is other preloading or lazy loading things you can do with Angular when you want to access some components. So it is possible, but I don't do that. The only lazy loading is through router. Otherwise, mine philosophy is that get all the code as fast as you can to the user and cache it there, so it works fast on the mobile, even if it's a slow 2G connection. And make it fast enough even on older mobiles, so it doesn't have to be the latest. So that's my philosophy of getting the speed, because the bandwidth is not usually the biggest problem. If it's a problem, I do it lazy loading or fetching in the background. Another question? If you already answered the first one, yeah, there's another one. The same code. It should be there in your browser now. But that's all for me. Thanks.